Emmanuel has asked a couple of very good questions inside our community, and I've chosen to bump up Emmanuel's questions in the Q&A backlog that we have because Emmanuel is currently going through an interview process, and he has a lot of good questions around how to answer certain questions in business analysis, job interviews. And so I'm bumping up a couple of those questions in our backlogs to make sure that these answers get out as quickly as possible. So Emmanuel asks, I have got a question which seems a bit both interwoven. However, I would like to shed more light as can be answered separate. Okay, so he has two questions that are really related. Question number one is, could you please give me an example of how you have managed a change transformation project? And then question number two is, can you please give an example of when you have improved a process? So let's tackle the first one. Can you please give an example of how you have managed a change transformation process? Okay, so if I was asked that question in an interview, there's a couple of different ways I could answer it. I'll give you an answer, and then more importantly, I'm going to explain to you why I'm answering the question in the way that I am, okay? So if somebody was to ask me that question about the change transformation project, I would say absolutely. And what the first thing I would do is I would ask a clarifying question, because this word here about change transformation can mean a couple of different things, okay? First of all, it can mean a change transformation project can basically mean the entire length of the project, all of the different phases of a project, or it could mean the tail end of the project where the business change is being implemented. So the solution has already been built, the processes have been designed, and now what you're doing is you're rolling out the change to the rest of the organization. So I would ask the clarifying question of the interviewer to say, by change transformation project, can I assume that you mean the change management portion of the project that usually comes at the tail end of the development process, where we're actually rolling out the change to the customers, as opposed to the front end when we're actually designing out the business processes, right? And when I ask that question of the interviewer, I'm doing a couple of things. Number one is that I'm not rushing to an answer without having all the information that I need, right? As an analyst, that's important to you. When you're in an interview situation, you demonstrating the fact that you're willing to ask clarifying questions is a very good signal to the interviewer. The second thing I'm doing by asking that clarifying question is that I'm demonstrating to the interviewer that I understand the entire life cycle of the solution delivery process. And what I'm saying is that I need to ask you a clarifying question about whether you're asking me about the tail end of the process or about the front end of the process. And just by asking that clarifying question, I'm already demonstrating to the interviewer that I actually understand the entire process. I just need some clarification about what your inquiry is about. Is it about the front end or is it about the back end? And the interviewer at that point might come back and say, well, yeah, we're really actually just talking about the change management portion that comes at the back end of a project. Can you talk to us a little bit about some of the things that you've done in the past to make that part of the project successful, right? That could be the response to that question. And then what I would do is I would respond to that question in a way that demonstrates to them, again, that I understand exactly how that part of the process works. In our fundamentals course, I have a couple of lessons here that I can actually flip to kind of demonstrate what it is that I'm saying. So in the very first lesson, when we're defining business analysis, I explained to you the process or the set of activities that business analysts typically take part in, right? When I ask my clarifying question of the interviewer, I'm asking them, hey, are you asking me about the process design work that happens at this stage? Or are you asking me about the change management part that happens at stage number 4, which is the rollout, go live, and change management? If the interviewer asks the following, answers the follow-up question, and they say this one, then I know to dive into talking about those activities. But let's just assume they're saying they are asking you about the change management portion of this. And what you could do at that point is to start talking very specifically about the activities and the deliverables that you've taken part in previous projects that are related to the delivery of the solution to the customer. So when you're rolling out a piece of software to the customers inside an organization, there's usually the technical change management component where you're actually pushing software from environment to environment. But there's also a big, in some organizations, a big business change management portion that involves a lot of training, and it involves the rollout of a number of new business procedures and work instructions, etc. And so if the interviewer told me that they're looking for answers for the change management portion, I would start talking about previous projects where I've helped the business side of the organization put together user guides, detailed work instructions, and a training plan to make sure that the customers of the product know how to use the system that we're delivering to them, and they have the detailed work instructions that are in line with the process design work that we've done on the project, right? And in a interview setting, I would normally weave that conversation through a lot of the different examples that I have in my resume. So I would say, you know, very early on in my career, I did a couple of process improvement projects where I did nothing but process improvement. And then say, I could speak to you about those examples. You could have a quick peek on my resume. Page number 3 is where you'll find that. But in the latest project that I did, we did a full redesign of a very large business process inside the organization. And I made sure that the stakeholders that I was dealing with on the business side, I made sure that they were producing the user guides and the work instructions that were in line with the agreements that we had very early on in the project, right? So if you are ever asked a very broad question in an interview, there are certain things that you have to do. Number one, make sure you're asking clarifying question if something is not clear to you. And if it's a broad one, like the business transformation question, again, what you want to do is you want to understand the full business analysis process that we have covered in different areas. And if it's something that you want me to cover in other videos, I can do that. You want to understand the full set of activities that the business analysts typically take part in. And then you want to ask a clarifying question to say, which part of this are you asking about? I need that clarity before I can really answer your question, okay? You ask the clarifying questions of the interviewer, and once they've clarified it, then if you have the right a mental model to understand all of these things, then you know exactly what categories and what activities you can start diving into. And you can explain to them, this is how that part of the process works for business analysts. And here are a couple of examples from my resume where I've actually done that for you. That gives the interviewer such a complete answer where it makes you look like you have everything that they need to be able to actually deliver on the projects that they're looking for, right? Again, if you're a beginner, it is going to be a little bit more difficult for you to answer questions in that way because you might not have all of the experience in your resume. You might not have a full understanding of what business analysts actually do throughout the entire life cycle of a project or a solution delivery process. So the objective here is that if you're a little bit more junior, is that you want to understand these things. You want to make sure that the types of work that you're trying to get yourself into are going to have those types of experiences on your resume for future interviews. And when you're sitting in front of an interviewer, it becomes less like an investigation that the interviewer is doing, and it becomes more like a conversation of how you can help them get to where they want to get to, right? That should be the end goal as you start to progress in your career, okay? So going back to that question, let's do a quick recap of that first one, right? So we said, could you please give an example of how you have managed a change transformation project? If we clarify it and they ask for the first part of the process, we talk about how we've done business design activities on projects before. If they ask about the tail end of the process, we talk about how we have helped the organization do training plans. We've helped them make sure that the detailed work instructions that they're providing to their employees are in line with the processes that we had built upfront on the project, right? So that is how I would answer that question, right? So try to get as close to that type of an answer as you possibly can in your own interview. Can you please give an example of when you have improved a process? Well, all right. So this second question is actually basically the same, the question, but they're asking you about the front end of the process, right? So the second question is asking you about the process improvement work that you've done on a project, possibly before the solution construction phase of the project has started, right? So typically on the types of projects that we work on, it works a little bit different in every organization, but if an organization is doing things the right way, what they'll normally do is they'll do a lot of business design work up front at this stage. They'll figure out what the solution looks like and they'll size it and they'll get funding to build the product based on the business processes that you've agreed on. and then they'll build the solution and deliver it to the organization across the rest of these phases, right? If your organization is doing things in that way, then it's very easy for you to answer that question about process improvement. You say, well, you could say that typically on projects, you want to make sure you're doing a lot of your process design work upfront so that we can get the business stakeholders to agree about how their organization is going to function. And then what we do is once we have that pretty firmed up is we can start designing a system solution around that process that now everybody has agreed to, right? And then if you have those types of experiences, if you've done process design work on projects, then you can again dive into your resume and say, well, on this project, we had to redesign, our purchasing process because there were a couple of places where there was a lot of manual work and things were slipping through the cracks, and we had to firm up that process a little bit before we delivered the solution to them. All right. So again, if you're a beginner, some of this might seem a little bit sophisticated, but you take things one step at a time. You learn the basics of how organizations should be executing projects. When you walk into an interview setting, a lot of times, even if that organization is not following this type of a process, means that you might be up against a bit of a chaotic process where they're not actually thinking things through properly. If you walk into an interview setting with an interviewer from that type of an organization, you can demonstrate to them that you understand exactly how they should be doing things and that you could possibly help them actually clean up some of their internal processes so that they're doing things in a methodical way that's going to give them the end result that they want to have, instead of just diving into building a solution, a technical solution, without actually doing any process design work, right? Those types of things are very common. So understand how the work should be getting done, which is this process here. And speak to your interviewer as fluidly as you possibly can. As an analyst, again, the fact that you're asking a lot of questions, the fact that you are doing some investigative work and asking probing questions before you try to answer their question, that in itself will demonstrate to your interviewer that you have an analytical mind and that you're actually an analyst, because when they put you on a project, that's how they want you to function, right? The way that you're answering your questions in an interview is the same way that they want you to be running the projects, right? So you can see that as an interviewee, when you're showing up to a job interview, you should be trying to look at it at less of an interview and more as a kind of a demonstration of what you can do for them. In that interview itself, you're saying, if you're asking them a lot of questions and you're giving them clear answers, you're already indicating to them implicitly, subconsciously, you're telling them, this is how I'm going to be working with your clients. And that is really the key to being able to stand yourself out amongst a lot of other analysts who may have a very back and forth kind of interviewer-interviewee relationship with their interviewers, all right? So there's a lot there. If you have follow-up questions, please let me know. I can answer you the questions about how I do interviews and why I do interviews. And a lot of times when I'm in an interview situation, my interviews are not really interviews. They're more like conversations. So as a contractor and a consultant, when somebody expresses interest in having me come in, what I'll normally do is I'll ask, before I even show up to the interview, I'll ask a lot of questions on the phone to say, hey, what kind of a project are you up against? Can you tell me a little bit more about, what kind of challenges you're facing right now, so that when we speak in person, that we can have a better conversation. I'll actually say things like that on the phone before the interview actually even happens. And what I do is when I show up to the interview, normally I'm already prepared to really dissect the issue that they're up against and start providing them with a solution right into the interview itself. And so what I'm starting to do is I'm actually starting to do business analysis work in the interview to demonstrate to them that, on day one when I step in, this is where I'm going to start continuing my work with you, is going to continue off exactly where we left this conversation off. So if you can get yourself to a place where you're starting to have those types of conversations in interviews, your success rate for being able to land work as a business analyst are going to go straight through the roof. Okay. So I hope that's been helpful. If you have follow-up questions, please let me know. If you have questions that are still on our backlog, those questions will be answered. I'm working through them as quickly as I can. If you have anything that's urgent that's on our backlog and that you're going through an interview process or you're stuck on a project or something like that, just feel free to reach out to me and ask me to kind of, bump that up in the queue in our backlog so that you can get the answers that you're looking for. All right. So I'll leave this one here and I'll see you on the next one.